Faith is not meant to fade. It is not a passing feeling, a cultural tradition, or something that belongs only to the past. True faith is a fire, a living, consuming force that transforms everything it touches. But today, that fire has grown dim in many hearts. Across the world, churches that were once filled with devotion now stand half empty. Families that once prayed together now struggle to find time for God. A deep spiritual coldness has crept into many souls, replacing zeal with apathy, holiness with complacency, and worship with routine. But this is not the first time the church has faced such a crisis. Throughout history, faith has often been tested, challenged, and even weakened by periods of corruption, division, and indifference. Yet every time the flame of faith seemed to be dying, God raised up saints, movements, and revivals to restore what had been lost. The truth is this: the fire of Catholicism can and will burn brightly again, but it requires action. It requires a return to what was forgotten, a rediscovery of what was abandoned, and a willingness to embrace the faith not just with words, but with lives transformed. The modern world offers countless distractions. Technology, entertainment, and materialism pull people away from God, filling their hearts with everything except what they truly need. And in this spiritual emptiness, many do not even realize what they are missing. They feel restless, lost, unfulfilled, but they do not see that their hunger is not for success, pleasure, or comfort. It is for God Himself. The next section will explore why faith has grown cold in modern times, the dangers of spiritual indifference, and how every Catholic can begin the journey of rekindling the fire of true devotion. The first step to reviving faith is recognizing the problem. Many Catholics today do not realize how much their spiritual lives have weakened. They still believe in God, they still attend Mass occasionally, they still call themselves Catholic, but the fire that once burned in their hearts is now just a faint glow. Their prayers are rushed, their devotion is mechanical, and their faith has become something they practice out of habit rather than love. This is the danger of spiritual coldness. It does not destroy faith suddenly. It drains it slowly, making the soul numb to its own decline. This is exactly what Christ warned against when He said, "Because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth." Revelation 3:16. Lukewarmness is one of the greatest enemies of true faith because it convinces people that they are fine when in reality, they are distant from God. It allows them to settle for the bare minimum instead of striving for holiness. It tells them that being good enough is sufficient when Christ calls them to be saints. History shows us that whenever the Church has faced a crisis of faith, renewal has always begun with individuals who refuse to remain lukewarm. Saint Francis of Assisi left behind wealth and comfort to live radically for Christ. Saint Teresa of Avila reformed the Carmelite order, calling for a deeper life of prayer and sacrifice. Saint John Vianney transformed an entire town simply by being a faithful priest who spoke the truth with love. These were not people waiting for the world to change. They were people who decided to change themselves first. The next section will explore the causes of modern spiritual indifference, the temptations that lead Catholics away from a life of faith, and how to recognize the warning signs of lukewarmness in our own souls. The world today is designed to pull people away from God. Everything about modern life, its speed, its distractions, its obsession with entertainment, makes it harder for souls to hear the voice of Christ. Social media fills minds with noise. Work and responsibilities consume every hour. Entertainment offers constant stimulation but leaves the heart empty. The result is that many Catholics simply do not make time for God anymore. One of the greatest lies of our time is that faith is just another part of life, something that can be balanced alongside work, relationships, and hobbies. But true faith is not just a part of life. It is life itself. Christ did not call His followers to fit Him into their schedules when convenient. He called them to surrender everything for His sake. Seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. Matthew 6:33. The moment faith becomes secondary, it begins to fade. This is why saints throughout history made radical decisions to protect their spiritual lives. The Desert Fathers fled society to devote themselves to prayer. Monks structured their entire lives around worship. Missionaries abandoned their homelands to bring Christ to distant lands. These were not casual believers. They understood that faith must be pursued with urgency, or it will be lost to the distractions of the world. The next section will explore how to break free from the distractions that weaken faith, why true devotion requires sacrifice, and practical steps every Catholic can take to place God at the center of their daily life. If faith is to be revived, it must begin in the heart. Many Catholics struggle with a sense of distance from God, not because He has abandoned them, but because they have stopped seeking Him with sincerity. Prayer has become a formality, the sacraments are received without deep reflection, and their love for God has grown cold. But faith is not something that can be maintained without effort. Like a fire, it must be fed, protected, and rekindled when it begins to die. One of the greatest sources of renewal in the Church has always been Eucharistic devotion. The saints knew that the presence of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament is not just a symbol, it is the very source of spiritual strength. Saint Alphonsus Liguori said, "You will gain more in 1 hour of adoration than in a lifetime of human effort." When faith feels weak, the solution is not to try harder. It is to return to Christ in the Eucharist, to sit in His presence, to let Him reignite the soul from within. But renewal also requires repentance. Many Catholics have lost their spiritual fire because they have allowed sin to remain in their lives. Unconfessed sin creates distance from God, making prayer feel empty and Mass feel routine. This is why every renewal in Church history has been marked by a return to the sacrament of confession. Sin must be uprooted, or it will choke the life of faith. The next section will explore how the sacraments of the Eucharist and confession are the keys to spiritual renewal, why devotion to Christ's presence is essential, and how Catholics can experience a personal revival through sacramental grace. The Catholic faith is not something that can survive in isolation. It thrives in community. Throughout history, periods of great renewal have always been driven by strong, faithful communities of believers who encouraged one another, prayed together, and held each other accountable. This is why Christ did not establish a faith of individuals. He established a church, a family of believers meant to grow together in holiness. One of the biggest reasons many Catholics struggle to keep their faith alive is that they are surrounded by people who do not share their devotion. Many parishes today lack a strong sense of community, making it easy for believers to feel disconnected and alone. But faith was never meant to be lived in solitude. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them. Matthew 18:20. In every era of Catholic renewal, communities of deep faith have been the foundation of revival. The early Christians met in homes to strengthen each other under persecution. The monastic movement preserved Christian civilization through prayer and study. The Catholic workers' movement built strong communities of faith amid societal collapse. If the Church is to experience renewal today, it must begin with the restoration of strong, faithful Catholic communities. The next section will explore how to build strong, faith-centered communities, why accountability is essential for spiritual growth, and how Catholics can find or create environments that help them live their faith fully. The saints did not wait for renewal to happen. They made it happen. They were not passive observers of a struggling church. They were the instruments God used to bring life back to what was dying. And every Catholic today is called to do the same. The revival of faith will not come from policies, programs, or human efforts alone. It will come when ordinary Catholics decide to live as saints. This means returning to daily prayer, sacramental devotion, fasting, and works of mercy. It means embracing the radical love of Christ and allowing it to shape every decision. It means not being afraid to be different, to live in such a way that others are drawn to the light of faith. This is how revival begins, when individuals choose holiness, and their example ignites the faith of others. The Church has always been renewed through those who loved Christ above all else. Saint Dominic revived Catholic teaching by preaching truth without compromise. Saint Ignatius of Loyola reignited the missionary spirit of the Church. Saint Faustina's devotion to divine mercy transformed millions of souls. They did not wait for others to take action. They became the spark that set the fire of renewal ablaze. The next section will explore why personal holiness is the foundation of church renewal, how every Catholic can become a light in their own community, and why living as saints today will determine the future of Catholicism. The final key to renewal is courage. The revival of faith will require bold Catholics who are not afraid to stand for truth, even when the world resists. Many today hesitate to live their faith openly, fearing rejection or criticism. But faith that is hidden cannot change the world. The Church needs men and women who will speak when others are silent, act when others hesitate, and love Christ with a devotion that cannot be ignored. History has shown that renewal always comes through those who refuse to be lukewarm. They are the ones who choose holiness in an age of sin, who proclaim truth in a world of lies, who remain faithful when others abandon their post. If the Church is to experience renewal today, it must begin with Catholics who are willing to give everything for Christ, not just in words, but in the way they live every single day. The next section will explore how to cultivate courage in the spiritual life, why bold faith is necessary for revival, and what each Catholic can do to become part of the movement that restores the Church. Reviving the Catholic faith is not just about personal devotion. It is about restoring the Church's place in the world as a beacon of truth. Too many Catholics today have accepted the idea that faith should be a private matter, something kept within the walls of churches or the silence of personal prayer. But this is not the faith Christ established. Catholicism was never meant to be hidden. It was meant to transform the world. The early Christians did not keep their faith to themselves. They preached it in the streets. They lived it openly. They were willing to suffer for it. And because of their boldness, the world changed. Pagan societies were converted, entire nations embraced the gospel, and Catholic culture flourished. This is what has been lost today: a sense of mission, of urgency, of understanding that faith is not just about personal salvation, but about bringing Christ to the world. This means Catholics must stop being passive. If we want to see renewal, we must be willing to be visible. This means speaking about faith in public, sharing the gospel with others, defending church teachings when they are attacked. It means wearing signs of devotion, being unafraid to live as Catholics in a world that is increasingly hostile to the truth. Faith that is kept hidden will die, but faith that is boldly proclaimed will spread like fire. The next section will explore how Catholics can bring their faith into every part of society, how to resist the temptation to hide belief out of fear, and why renewal will only come when Catholicism once again takes its rightful place as a public, unapologetic force in the world. A great tragedy of modern Catholicism is the loss of deep, sacrificial love for Christ. Many today treat faith as an obligation rather than a passion. They go through the motions, attending Mass, saying prayers, following moral teachings, but their hearts are not burning with love for God. But true faith is not just about believing in Christ. It is about loving Him with every part of our being. This is why history's great saints were so effective in bringing renewal. Saint Francis of Assisi loved Christ so deeply that he gave up everything to follow him. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux burned with such love that she transformed the Church from within the walls of her convent. Saint Maximilien Kolbe loved Christ so much that he willingly gave his life for another prisoner in Auschwitz. They did not just practice faith. They lived it with a love so deep that it could not be ignored. The Church will not be renewed through empty routine or intellectual knowledge alone. It will only be renewed when Catholics begin to love Christ with the same fire that has always transformed the world. This means spending time in His presence, developing an intimate relationship with Him, allowing that love to shape every decision. It means moving beyond obligation into true devotion, where Christ is no longer just part of life, but the very center of it. The next section will explore how to cultivate a deeper love for Christ, how to move from routine to passion in the spiritual life, and why true renewal will only come when Catholics fall in love with God once again. Faith does not grow in comfort. Throughout history, the Church has been strongest when it has been challenged, when it has been forced to rely on God rather than the approval of the world. Periods of peace and compromise have often led to decline, while times of persecution and suffering have produced the greatest saints. Today, many Catholics have become too comfortable. They have settled for an easy faith that requires little sacrifice, little discipline, little struggle. But a comfortable faith is a dying faith. The saints understood this. They embraced suffering as a means of growing closer to Christ. They fasted. They disciplined themselves. They accepted trials joyfully, not because suffering is good in itself, but because it purifies the soul, deepens faith, and strengthens the will. This is what modern Catholics must rediscover: the ability to embrace sacrifice, to willingly take up the cross, to endure hardship with faith, rather than seeking to avoid it. Renewal will not come to the church if Catholics are unwilling to suffer for their faith. It will not come if they seek only comfort and convenience. It will come when they once again embrace the way of the cross, understanding that true joy, true transformation, and true holiness only come through sacrifice. The next section will explore how suffering strengthens faith, why modern Catholics must rediscover the value of sacrifice, and how embracing the cross will bring about the renewal the Church so desperately needs. One of the greatest obstacles to renewal is the loss of true leadership within the Church. The saints who brought revival did not wait for others to take action. They led by example. They were the ones who stepped forward, who called others to holiness, who refused to remain silent when the faith was in crisis. Today, too many Catholics wait for bishops or priests to lead the way before they take their faith seriously. But the Church has never been renewed by waiting. It has always been renewed by action. Every Catholic has the responsibility to be a leader in faith. Fathers must lead their families in prayer. Mothers must raise their children to love Christ above all things. Young people must be unafraid to stand for truth, even when their peers reject them. Parishioners must encourage their priests to preach boldly, to uphold doctrine, to prioritize the salvation of souls over worldly concerns. This is how the Church has always been restored, not through bureaucratic reforms, but through individual Catholics stepping into their roles as spiritual leaders. Every revival in Church history has begun not with institutions, but with holy individuals who refuse to let the faith die in their time. If the Church is to be renewed today, it will only happen when Catholics stop waiting for leadership and start becoming the leaders they are called to be. The next section will explore how every Catholic can take responsibility for the faith, how to lead within families, parishes, and communities, and why true renewal will begin with those who take action rather than those who wait. The final and most powerful sign of renewal is conversion. A revived church is one that draws souls back to Christ. The fire of true faith is contagious. It spreads, it inspires, it brings the lost home. But today, many Catholics have lost their missionary spirit. They focus only on their personal faith, forgetting that they are called to bring others to Christ. This is why the Church is struggling. The faith has been kept inside churches, inside homes, inside personal lives, when it is meant to go out into the world. This is not just the duty of priests or missionaries. Every Catholic is called to evangelize. The apostles did not leave the work of conversion to a select few. They took it upon themselves. They preached in the streets. They shared the gospel with everyone they met. They lived in such a way that others were drawn to the truth. This is what must happen again. Catholics must stop being afraid to speak about their faith. They must invite others to Mass, to confession, to deeper prayer. They must live in a way that makes Christ visible in everything they do. A church that does not evangelize is a church that is dying. If Catholics want to see renewal, they must become missionaries in their own families, workplaces, and communities. They must ask themselves, who have I brought closer to Christ? How have I shared the faith? Am I truly living in a way that leads others to salvation? These are the questions that determine whether faith is alive or whether it is fading. The next section will explore how every Catholic can take part in the mission of evangelization, why conversion is the true sign of renewal, and how the fire of faith will only return when it is once again shared with the world. The renewal of faith will not come through half measures. If Catholics truly desire to see the Church revived, they must be willing to commit fully to the gospel. This means rejecting the lukewarm mentality that says faith is just one part of life rather than life itself. It means embracing Catholicism not as a cultural identity, but as the absolute center of existence. Too many today live divided lives, attending Mass but ignoring Catholic teaching in daily decisions, praying occasionally but allowing the world to shape their values. This is why faith has grown weak. It cannot survive when treated as secondary. It must be everything. This is why the saints lived differently. They did not seek balance between the world and faith. They gave themselves entirely to God. Saint Benedict formed communities of prayer in an age of corruption. Saint Joan of Arc fought with unwavering faith in a world that rejected her mission. Saint Padre Pio endured suffering and persecution, but never wavered in his devotion. They were not concerned with fitting in or being accepted. They were concerned with being faithful, no matter the cost. The Church will only be renewed when Catholics stop living as if faith is optional. Holiness is not a suggestion, it is a command. Christ did not say, Try your best. He said, "Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." Matthew 5:48. Renewal will come when Catholics once again take this call seriously, shaping their entire lives around it, rather than trying to fit faith into a life already dominated by worldly concerns. The next section will explore how to make faith the center of life, why total commitment is necessary for renewal, and what Catholics must do to move from mediocrity to true holiness. The modern world constantly tempts Catholics to compromise their faith. It tells them that religion should be personal and private, that they should not bring their beliefs into public life, that they should adjust Catholic teaching to fit the times. But history has shown that every time the Church compromises, it grows weaker. Every time it stands firm, it grows stronger. If renewal is to come, Catholics must reject the pressure to water down the truth. This means defending Catholic doctrine even when it is unpopular. It means refusing to remain silent when morality is attacked. It means choosing Christ over comfort, truth over acceptance, conviction over compromise. Too many Catholics today are afraid to be different, afraid to lose relationships, afraid to be judged. But Christ was clear. "Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his glory." Luke 9:26. Faith is not something that can be hidden or adjusted for convenience. It must be proclaimed boldly, without apology, without fear, without compromise. The saints understood this. St. Thomas More chose martyrdom rather than betray his conscience. St. Paul Mickey preached even as he was crucified. St. Edith Stein left behind worldly success to embrace Christ fully. They knew that Catholicism is not meant to conform to the world. It is meant to transform the world. The Church will only be renewed when Catholics once again live this truth with courage. The next section will explore why compromise weakens faith, how to develop the courage to stand for Catholic truth, and why renewal requires Catholics to be unafraid to live their beliefs openly. Reviving faith requires a return to Catholic tradition. Many today believe that in order to make the faith appealing, it must be modernized, made more relaxed, stripped of discipline. But the history of the Church tells a different story. The times of greatest renewal have always come when Catholics return to the foundations of the faith: reverent liturgy, deep prayer, strong moral teaching, and unwavering commitment to doctrine. The decline of faith in recent years has coincided with a decline in traditional devotion. Many no longer attend confession regularly, no longer pray the rosary, no longer fast or do penance, no longer approach the Mass with reverence. But the saints were not renewed through comfort. They were renewed through discipline, through sacrifice, through deep devotion to the sacraments. Catholics today must return to these practices if they want to see the fire of faith burn again. This means restoring reverence in worship, embracing traditional prayers, fasting as a form of spiritual strength, and living according to the full teachings of the Church, not just the parts that are convenient. The spiritual life is not meant to be easy. It is meant to be transformative. The saints who changed history did not do so by seeking the easiest path, but by embracing the full demands of holiness. If the Church is to be renewed today, it must return to what made it strong in the past. The next section will explore how Catholics can rediscover the power of traditional devotion, why reverence in worship leads to deeper faith, and how a return to the foundations of Catholicism will bring about renewal. The final stage of renewal is perseverance. Many Catholics feel inspired for a short time, seeking to grow in faith for a few weeks or months, only to lose motivation when difficulties arise. But true renewal is not a passing emotion. It is a lifelong commitment. The saints who changed the Church did not just have moments of passion for God. They endured. They remained faithful even when it was difficult. They refused to turn back. This is what must happen today. If faith is to be restored, Catholics must be willing to remain strong even when they are tired, even when the world discourages them, even when they do not feel inspired. They must develop the habit of prayer, of sacramental life, of virtue, not just when it is easy, but when it is hard. This is the difference between a passing revival and a lasting transformation. Renewal is not about one moment, it is about perseverance over a lifetime. The Church will only be strong again when Catholics are committed to long-term faithfulness, when they choose to grow even when it is inconvenient, when they decide that nothing will separate them from Christ. This is how saints are made. This is how faith is restored. The next section will explore how to develop perseverance in faith, how to remain strong in the face of trials, and why lasting renewal requires long-term commitment rather than short-term enthusiasm. Faith is not something that revives itself. It is something that must be actively rekindled. If the church is to be renewed, if the fire of Catholicism is to burn brightly again, then it will only happen when individual Catholics make the decision to live differently, to seek holiness with urgency, and to never settle for a lukewarm faith. The world will continue to offer distractions. It will continue to tempt believers into complacency. But history has shown that every time faith has seemed to fade, God has raised up a new generation of Catholics who refuse to let it die. The question is, will we be part of that generation? Will we choose to be the ones who bring renewal, who restore devotion, who stand for truth, who lead souls back to Christ? If you believe this message is urgent, if you are ready to take action, then start now. Inscreva-se no canal e siga Jesus. This is more than just a video. This is a call to action. A call to deepen your faith, to strengthen your devotion, to be part of the movement that restores Catholicism to its rightful place in the world. Turn on notifications, share this message, and invite others to join in this renewal. Together, we can reignite the faith that has been lost. And I want to hear from you. What steps are you taking to strengthen your faith? How have you overcome spiritual coldness? Share your story in the comments. I read every message, and your testimony could inspire someone else to take the next step in their journey. My name is Oliver, and it has been an honor to walk with you through this message. You are not alone. There are many of us who long to see the church alive again, who refuse to let faith fade, who are ready to stand for Christ in a world that desperately needs him. Stay strong, stay faithful, be the light that reignites the fire of Catholicism. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, may God bless you abundantly, and may you walk each day with the passion and courage of those who came before us.